Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon, or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
Imagine growing up in the 1960s. As a child, you have premonitions and deja vu. Your family ignores and is often embarrassed by your sensitivity. Even the local parish has ostracized you. By the time you reach age 11, the awkward teen years, you're on the social fringe and an outcast due to your paranormal gift and undiagnosed Asperger's. As you head into your late teens and age 20, you're attracted to the dark side. At that point, most people's lives would fall off the rails. One man didn't. Tonight's guest is a special inspiration. He's renowned author, autism expert, and psychic medium William Stillman. We talk about William's life and how he transformed from darkness into the light, helping and inspiring countless people over the past few decades. Stick around to the end, and you'll also learn some surprising personal truths about my co-host and me.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Psychic William Stillman is the internationally known award-winning author of the Autism and the God Connection book trilogy that explores aspects of spiritual giftedness in many people with autism. His accuracy in discerning the truth and making predictions that come to fruition has been acclaimed by his clients as truly extraordinary and ranks at 90 to 98% accuracy. William specializes in identifying clients' gifts and talents as well as aiding discarnate spirits, ghosts, to transition to the heavenly realm. And he has investigated hauntings on behalf of the Pennsylvania Paranormal Association. William has also relieved others of the physical symptoms of pain and discomfort with prayer and laying on of hands. He has been consulted on missing persons and unsolved homicide cases. William Stillman takes his psychic work very seriously. Before each event, he spends about 45 minutes in prayer and meditation. William has been interviewed on numerous radio shows of a paranormal nature, including Coast to Coast AM, the most listened to overnight radio program in North America. William has presented in forums nationally and has on 3 occasions been a guest speaker for Lilydale Assembly. I just did a series on them. In upstate New York. William also teaches a class titled Developing Your Personal Intuition, Levels 1 and 2. Above all, William especially enjoys facilitating psychic group galleries, similar to John Edward on TV's Crossing Over, and he treasures the amazing opportunities and validations that have come from touring his galleries throughout his home state of Pennsylvania and beyond. William's website is williamstillman.com. That's williamstillman.com.
And we are set. I am here with a great guest tonight, which we'll introduce in a second. But first, hey, Kyle Carver, my sometimes co-host. Welcome to the show. Good to have you again, buddy.
Hey, it's good to be here. Always good to be here. I'm super excited to talk to our secret guest for tonight.
Yeah, his name is William Stillman. He's a kind of self-taught psychic medium. He's a prolific author. He's like a man of many skills. And I've seen him on a lot of podcasts recently, and I'm super stoked to talk to you. William, welcome to the show.
Hey, fellas, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to a fascinating chat.
Excellent. So I mentioned that you're kind of a prolific author. Your most recent book is called The Practicing Psychic, an essential guide for staying grounded, navigating skeptics, and honoring your gift. Can you tell us why you wrote the book? I mean, it seems kind of self-explanatory, but kind of why you wrote it and who ideally is the book intended for? What type of person do you think should really pick up this book and benefit from it?
The book is written for anyone who is intrigued and interested in the behind-the-scenes mechanics of what it is to be a psychic or a psychic medium. And I wrote the book because I have been doing this for about 20 years now professionally. I'm in my 18th year. And when I first started out, there was me and one other person in my general territory. And now there are upwards of a dozen or more people. And so I've been seeing this as a trend, not just local to me, but nationally as well. More and more people, particularly young people, think that it's cool or hip or edgy to sort of get into this field. And I realized that there was no guidebook that would be a code of ethics / Hippocratic oath for people in this field or who are curious about getting into this field. And that's why I wrote the book. I didn't have a mentor. As you mentioned, Bob, I'm completely self-taught in all that I do. And I really felt that it would be a valuable resource where none existed previously.
No, that's excellent. I mean, you started when you're 40. You'd mentioned you're 60 or close to it. Is there any psychic ability that you've had evolve in the last 15 or 20 years that surprises you the most?
I think that I am always engaged in a perpetual state of becoming and evolving. And so there are things that I am learning to be true about myself that are surprising to me. COVID has been a real learning curve for me in that I used to sit very close with a client. I used to take their hand in mine. Haven't been able to do that. It's been hands off, having to try to read people wearing masks, having to try to work with people online. Skype is my preferred platform. And so I've been doing this with people from all over the world, long distance. And what I've learned is that the geographic location makes absolutely no difference in terms of the quality and the caliber of the work. So that's been fascinating for me. I have understood that I also have the ability to communicate with animals. And so that's what I'm going to be doing tomorrow night. I have an event online, reading people's pets. I am also able to remove pain and discomfort from people's bodies with my hands. Takes about 5-10 minutes maximum. And so it's a continual learning process. Just last night, I did another podcast where I was asked if I could channel an extraterrestrial. And I was able to do that. So it was, it's never dull.
All right. So, William, you are a self-acclaimed late bloomer with this. So if you can explain maybe some of the history of why you didn't recognize or didn't practice, or what brought you to it such later in life, and you're also self-taught. So what was this process of, the DIY process of learning these new things and rediscovering things that maybe you had already known, but you were disconnected by, like the veil of amnesia?
Right, Kyle. Well, I'm living proof that it's never too late to discover and claim, or rediscover and reclaim, as the case may be, your gifts and talents. I'm also a very firm believer that we are all possessed of spiritual gifts and talents as our birthright, but none of us is obligated or beholden to do anything with it if we choose not to. I started out this life as a painfully, exquisitely sensitive person. And through a series of unfortunate events, that all got blocked and suppressed and was dormant for a very long time. And so it really wasn't until I was in my late 30s, just on the precipice of 40, that I really initiated a change and transformation in my life to access and tap into directly those spiritual gifts that I felt that I was curious about and believed I possessed. And once I made that commitment, and quite frankly, once I connected to God, about whom I had been completely dismissive and indifferent for decades, everything shot through the roof. I made up for lost time in about 3 months or less. And it was then that I felt confident enough to begin the process of offering my services professionally. So it's never too late.
I read that you are vegetarian, and I'm actually vegan. Have you always been vegetarian? And or if not, did that change within like the awakening process? And how does it affect like what you do, or how do you believe that it affects what you do?
I have been vegetarian since 1995, so that about 26 years now. And it was in keeping with the mindset that my body is my instrument. And so when I prepare for work and when I am living my life on a daily basis, I am continually addressing 3 domains of my personhood and trying to keep those domains balanced and running for optimal performance. And those domains are my mental, emotional, my physical, and my spiritual well-being. So I'm in boot camp every day addressing these 3 domains. But the vegetarianism, it was a very conscious choice and decision in keeping with the idea of wanting to be as clean and clear and pure a channel as possible, and to contribute my part to the collaborative and cooperative process with all of the spiritual energy that is working with me. They're doing their part, and I feel as though this is what I am able to contribute to uphold my end of the agreement.
Is there something that comes from like, I'll use the term the other side, about the consumption of animals or the consumption of meat? Is there any kind of information that is inspired by this other side, or is that just something that you feel personally that it helps you remain more open and clean?
I'm not going to pass judgment on anyone that chooses to eat meat. However, for myself personally, I have an understanding that when you consume the flesh of animals who have been slaughtered for consumption, you are also simultaneously consuming the trauma of the slaughter that has been imprinted on that creature at a cellular level. So there's a choice that you are making to take that into your body, and that may very well affect your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. Perhaps not. May depend on the kind of person you are. But for me, I have made the conscious decision not to consume meat. And I feel as though it is one of the ways in which I'm able to contribute to that collaborative and cooperative process. Does that answer your question?
Kyle, this will be on one of your posts, because Kyle goes on Facebook sometimes and he does have debates sometimes, friendly debates with people about not eating meat. He just gave you probably your best argument yet, Kyle. It's ingrained in your DNA, what you absorb, it affects you personally.
Yeah, I've actually heard very similar responses and feelings as William just shared. Even not from a spiritual side of it, but basically the consumption of fear and terror and whatnot. So it's interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I grew up in, a meat eating household, and I ate meat myself.
Yeah.
And trust me, when I drive past a McDonald's, the smell of burning fat, it's, smells great, but I know that ultimately it's not physically healthy for me, but I think that it also has an effect on the other 2 domains, which are mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Okay. So some of your earliest experiences before the dark times, you had premonitions and deja vu as a toddler. You said there was like a little man that would climb your crib.
Well, that only happened on one occasion. The deja vu would happen on a regular basis. The premonitions of things that people were going to do or say happened on a regular basis. I remember having recurring dreams that I think may have been flashes of prior life connections. I remember twice having a dream in which I was standing on the front lawn of my home picking pennies up out of the grass. And the next day, actually did that in reality. And this happened in two different locations, having no idea, no clue of how the pennies got there. The little man that climbed up through the slats on the crib was probably one of my earliest memories. And I remember being put down in a bedroom at my grandparents' home, of course, it being completely dark. And this little man climbed up through the bars of the crib and stood on the mattress with his hands on his hips, just kind of staring at me. And I remember screaming and crying and, consciously trying to wish him away. And as I was telling Bob before we began the interview, that's been sort of a theme throughout my life, with this fear of kind of elves and gnomes and trolls, and the Munchkins and the Wizard of Oz really creeped me out, where other kids, were afraid of the flying monkeys. So I don't know if there's, again, some kind of connection to a past life experience where all of that is concerned. I remember having this crazy dream that was also another recurring dream, where I was being chased through the house by this troll. And it was almost like a Lord of the Rings type of thing. And I won't go into all kinds of detail now. It's kind of a neat dream, neat story. But I can't say that we all reincarnate. I think that it's a highly personal and individualized decision, but I think that for a lot of us, it probably makes good sense to do so. But I also believe that we don't always incarnate as beings that are human either. And so I don't know if in some crazy parallel world, I was in some way part of another culture of little people or something like that. And they've, been kind of keeping tabs on me intermittently. I know it sounds really far out there, but I don't have another explanation for it.
Yes.
No, that's sorry, Bob. I'm getting very excited when I hear William talk.
I was just going to interject real quickly, if you don't mind, Kyle, then you can jump back in. Well, you were just on an interview with Whitley Strieber, so that doesn't sound crazy at all, William. That actually sounds kind of tame, because he's had a lot of stuff that happened to him, and he's kind of like he wrote the book Communion that really got people thinking about that. I did have one question for you. You mentioned like the little people or little beings. I think you've been to Lilydale, and I've been there a couple times. I was there over the summer, and I actually just did 3 episodes based on 3 different interviews with people there. They have a fairy trail there. What are your thoughts on fairies and the fairy trail at Lilydale?
I've presented at Lilydale several times, and I actually met a gal who was driving into Lilydale and said there were a couple of little men on the hood of her car as she was driving in. I didn't feel or sense anything about the fairy trail while I was there. That's not to suggest that there wasn't activity there, but I absolutely believe that there are elemental or fairy energies, and I think that we need to have a healthy respect of those energies, and if not, at least a healthy respect for all of nature.
No, that's great. William has had, I'm not quite sure, I haven't heard them. I know you've alluded to them on podcasts, William, where you've channeled an alien before. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
And it was quite unexpected. And for a period of time there, it was happening on a fairly regular basis. It was kind of not unnerving, but very unusual, because it's really not my thing, to be honest with you.
We've also heard that you have channeled an alien.
Yes. His name is Richard.
Whatever that may mean.
His name is Richard.
Richard.
I asked him what his name was.
Oh, that's cool.
And he responded with a series of clicking noises that I didn't understand. And I said, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to pronounce that. Is there something else I can call you? And he said Richard, which I thought sounded very mundane and pedestrian. And then I looked it up, and the name translates to powerful leader. So I thought that was rather curious.
Yeah, right. Sure. the connection with Richard, did that happen like spontaneously? Were you like out grocery shopping, or is this like during a meditation session, or how did that come about?
It happened spontaneously, but it was within the context of a psychic event. So I have learned to tame and refine what it is that I do so that I deliberately turn on and I deliberately turn off. And so I'm no longer getting things when I'm out in public because I disallow that. And so this happened in the context of a psychic event that I was doing with a room full of people. He was there and he was making reference to, memory serves, he was making reference to someone in the audience who had experiences with sightings of extraterrestrial craft as a child, had missing time as a child, and also had a implant behind one ear and also a mark on his testicles. And since that day, I have found that to be very common in people who are potentially abductees and have been marked for surveillance and follow-up.
Now, William, you've actually done readings for people and you've kind of picked up there may be kind of some alien gene or alien history, and you've talked to them, and I think they weren't surprised when they weren't from this world. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Richard, was he like a gray alien? Was he, because there's different aliens that you hear about. Did you have a visual of him, or did you just channel the auditory part of him?
No, I had something of a visual. In fact, he touched me a couple of times, which was a little unpleasant. But what am I? I'm almost 6 feet tall, so he was maybe a good foot shorter than I am, and he stood right next to me. He looks like what you stereotypically would think of as an alien, with the very large eyes and a little slit for a mouth. And
So more like a gray versus like a reptilian then, correct?
oh, absolutely,
Okay,
yes,
all right.
absolutely, and very benign. I don't know if he feels emotions in the way that we do, but there was certainly an expression from him of great care and concern and what we might call compassion. But with Richard, after the first time that he came through spontaneously, then there have been a couple of other occasions where I deliberately attempted to connect with him, have been able to do that.
I was to say, is there a particular place where he resides from, or where is he connecting from, or how does that work?
That's a good question. Again, when I go into these sessions where I'm working one-on-one with a client or I'm working with an audience, please understand that for me, I develop an almost immediate amnesia about everything that I do. And so people follow up with me, sometimes a year later and so on, like, hey, do you remember? And I'm sorry, I have to say, I'm so sorry. I have absolutely no memory of you or what we discussed. And that's probably a spiritual buffer of sorts to keep me insulated from becoming overwhelmed. And so please forgive me if I'm not able to recall a lot of what you're asking. But if memory serves, I believe he made mention of somehow, it was almost like some sort of tunnel of sorts that he could project himself through. So I don't think that it was him physically being here in person, but sort of like the essence or maybe an ethereal version of him being projected from a distance at a further point. Does that make any sense?
It really does. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And if you don't mind, just I'll hop back just very briefly. You mentioned like the deja vu experience with like the coins in the pennies in your yard. It had me thinking, because oftentimes when I have experienced deja vu, I've always thought of it as obviously that I've been here before, which it would indicate to me it's like I'm experiencing an event that I already have. However, it's also kind of a conundrum in my mind where I'm like, is deja vu actually, am I experiencing something that I already have, or am I experiencing something that a future me has already experienced? It's weird. It's like a weird meta question, I suppose. I can sort of see deja vu being just different dimensions of myself, or I don't know how deja vu necessarily works. Do you have any kind of thoughts or opinions or about like deja vu and like how that works or what it is?
I would accept it simply as a reinforcement that the timeline has aligned with who you are, where you are, and what you're doing in that moment. So I would accept it as a validation that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing in that moment and to just continue to push forward. I found in my work that a lot of people become overly preoccupied with some of these things to the point of obsession. And I don't think it's intended to, torture and plague us with trying to deconstruct what's going on. I think we just need to accept it as a little benchmark on the life path or the journey that we've embarked upon.
Interesting.
So, William, you've gone through different phases in your life. As a toddler, you had premonitions and deja vu. And then kind of when you were in 11 to maybe 19, as through your teens, there was a tough kind of sled you went through there, which kind of took you away from the path that you are now. It was almost an opposite extreme. Can you talk about that time and what were some of the draws? Like you mentioned the Phantom at one point, and I don't know if he occurred during that point, but that was a dark time for you. I wonder if you could share that because it's inspirational how you emerged out of it and have such faith and have such a clear mind now.
Thank you, Bob. Well, as I've mentioned, I took a rather circuitous route to get to the point where I am now. You have to remember that as a child, I was, as I said, exquisitely, painfully sensitive, and I realize now quite empathic. One of my earliest memories, and I've written about this in my books, is sitting in a church pew at 6 years old and sobbing and not being able to contain my emotion and becoming aware of my parents whispering back and forth until they just picked me up and walked out in the middle of the church service, which was really quite shocking to me. I didn't realize you could do that. And I never told anyone what that was all about, but I certainly had a good reason for being so emotional. I had been staring at the stained glass window of the crucifixion, and I was grieving for the pain and the suffering that Christ must have endured at 6 years old. I mean, that's pretty sensitive.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so what happened is, as I was growing and maturing and on the precipice of adolescence, it was about age 10, 11. When you're that sensitive as a child, other kids tend to be rather obtuse and unaware. But when you're growing and maturing, there's a certain age where kids become a little bit more sophisticated. They form cliques, they become more judgmental. And that was the beginning of the end for me, because that kind of sensitivity doesn't go over very well with peers, particularly other little boys. And I was definitely odd man out. And so for a good 7 to 8 years of my life, on virtually a daily basis, I was verbally abused and physically harassed. And my speech and my body language were openly and publicly mocked and mimicked in front of adults who either did nothing, they ignored it, or suggested I should buck up, snap out of it, and get over it, which was not helpful. And I didn't have a support system within my own family. And I also, in my mind, in my autistic brain, I compartmentalized the concept of God to 90 minutes one Sunday morning a week. And so I didn't expand the concept of God to be immediately accessible at any given moment in time.
William, if you don't mind real quickly, just for context, this is the 1970s, just I think, right around the 1970s, maybe, or during that decade. So it just gives the audience context that there was no political correctness. People could be mean. But I remember those times. People could be mean if you're overweight or if you're awkward or whatever. There wasn't a lot of filter on people back then.
Well, it still happens today. Yeah. But this is the early 1970s. And you have to remember, there wasn't a lot that was covered in the media with regards to anything paranormal or metaphysical. Or if it was sort of kind of, seen as sensational and kind of laughed off. At that time, you had the amazing Kreskin, who was a mentalist. You had Jean Dixon, who was a very well-known clairvoyant, and she would, regularly make the rounds on the talk shows. And then everything else got lumped into what was then called the occult. And the occult included witchcraft and devil worshippers and demonology, vampires, werewolves, ghosts. And unfortunately, I was reflecting back what was being projected upon me, and the abused became the abuser. And during that very dark period in time, I became attracted to dark things. So I became attracted to what was then called the occult. How this bypassed my parents, I have no idea, but I was sending away for catalogs of witchcraft supplies and spell casting, and the books that I would get out of the library were all in this subject matter. What happened is dark things found me loud and clear, and so that's the phantom to which you were referring that began to show up every night in my bedroom doorway.
Did you use Ouija boards or anything to summon that type of entity? Were you doing any rituals or anything, or when did he first appear?
I wasn't doing anything deliberately or knowingly, but yes, there was a Ouija board in the house. I grew up in an older home with some questionable history to it. And so far as rituals or spell casting, there were just things that I thought I was doing, but probably there wasn't any authenticity to any of it. But that didn't matter from the perspective of me being an easy target and a ready mark for this negative energy that wanted to seduce me into recruitment, quite frankly.
And you had a red mark on your hand too during that time, right?
I did indeed, in the center of my right palm.
And what did you think that was?
I didn't know what it, well, I shouldn't say I didn't know what it was. I believed that I associated it with all of these dark things that I was attracted to. I later found out that my mother had concluded that it was a mark, quote unquote, of some sort connected to all of that. You have to understand, this was a period of time when there were, still reverberations from Rosemary's Baby. The Exorcist had just come out. I wanted to find out everything I possibly could about that. I thought there was something appealing about being possessed because that would make me superior or very different from everybody else. And so I was ripe for the picking, quite frankly.
And how did you emerge out of that? In a movie, there's the inciting event, right? Where maybe Kyle, the main character, is going down a certain path. Something happens, he pivots and he goes to the right direction or the wrong direction, depending on what genre it is. What was your inciting event to get you away from that dark side to more to the light?
Yeah, there was no glamorous climax. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Ah.
It was it was a very methodical, very slow, very deliberate process. Remember, I said the phantom showed up to seduce me into recruitment, to join forces with him. And so it was uncomfortable and unnerving, but it was not frightening, because that would have undermined his agenda. And he gave me a taste of what it would feel like to have power over my tormentors.
Was that through was it a feeling he was able to impose, or was it like visions that he showed you of what you could do?
No, it was a specific event.
It was a specific event. Oh, wow.
There was a specific event that occurred that told me loud and clear, this is not my imagination. This is real.
Hmm. Are you comfortable saying what that specific event was? Was it like the prom, like Carrie, or?
No, it's a story I've told many times. I was standing on the recess playground in 5th grade, and there were a couple of other bookworm, nerdish types of kids next to me, and I was telling them that I could cast spells, and they said, "Prove it." And I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And they said, "Break up that fight over there." And maybe about 6 yards from where we were standing, there was this multi-boy pileup. I don't know what precipitated it, but there was maybe about a dozen boys involved where they were just wrestling and fist fighting and so on. And they said, "Break up that fight. If you can cast spells, if you're a witch, you can do it." And so I began reciting, again, what I thought was a spell, but it really didn't matter if it was or it wasn't. What mattered was that the phantom, I called him the dark man, was trying to manipulate me. And I recited this spell. The moment I finished the recitation, in the next beat, A gust of wind swept across the playground that stank like cow manure and sent everyone scattering. And these kids just looked at me with their jaws hanging open. And in that moment, I knew this was real. When I'm talking about the dark man, I wrote a book that was published in 2016 called Under Spiritual Siege: How Ghosts and Demons Affect Us and How to Combat Them. And it's based in large part on the history of my own personal experiences. And I realize now how useful that's been to me in helping me to discern other people who are also under spiritual siege. And in researching the book, I had to revisit the incidents with the dark man from my childhood. And I was shocked to learn that there are countless numbers of people that saw the exact same phantom that I saw as a child nearly 50 years ago. And there are drawings of him that people have made online. It's very simple. Just Google. They have a name for him. They call him the Hat Man.
Yeah.
Because he stands about 6'2" or so, a black silhouette of a man in a broad-brimmed black hat and a floor-length black coat. Now, you have to remember, this is like 1973. And sometimes he has red glowing eyes. Sometimes he has a malicious, evil-looking grin. Mine didn't, because I think he was slicker than that to know that that would have shut me down. Remember, I said his intention was to seduce me into recruitment, into joining forces with him.
Yeah.
And so it was really a point of great validation for me in those experiences, knowing, my gosh, this was real. And other people have experienced a very similar phantom.
Actually, on this show, we have a gentleman named Sam Baltrusis. He's an author. He's he's a medium too, and he has a podcast, which Kyle and I were on when he had kind of a film festival last year that Kyle and I were involved in. But he, in Salem, you haven't been to Salem for a long time, William, but he was having bad issues with the Hat Man, exactly that you described. But to him, the Hat Man was very personal just to him. But I don't think people realize that the Hat Man is almost omnipresent or in many different places and affects many different people. Is that your understanding? Was he very personal just to you, or did you realize that he could be inflicting a lot of other people at the same time, or a lot of people on his hit list?
Well, he seems to be a universally perceived phantom, but I think in my case, he tailored his shtick to me personally.
And does it haunt you still? How do you feel? Or just like have no fear of that right now, that part of your life?
I've been there, done that. And so now I sort of treat it like a nuisance, like a gnat that kind of buzzes around your head and you have to swat it away.
Yeah. Now, it seems like you're a religious and spiritual person. You have faith in God, which is interesting. I'm interested to hear how, religion with what being a psychic and a medium, how that strengthened your faith in God. And I'm curious, what your thoughts are of good and evil, and why do we have evil? Why is there evil?
Well, I think evil has to exist in order to create learning opportunities for the human race. I think it has to be there. And I think that it has to be there in order for us to emerge victorious in conquering it under certain conditions and in certain circumstances. I think that we all possess the capacity to do evil acts, and yet we also all possess the capacity to undergo transformations and to emerge and evolve, as I have. Trust me, there are things that I have done and said in my past of which I am not proud at all, but I have atoned for that, and I have personally accepted responsibility for my prior bad acts. I think that we are all works in progress, and I think that we are also all at risk of relapsing from time to time if we don't stay focused. I'm not a religious person. I was raised in the Episcopal Church. I would say I'm probably a non-practicing Christian, but I'm also open to other people's spiritual beliefs so long as they serve the greater good of the highest order.
Is there a God presence, you think, that kind of oversees the whole universe and our karma and everything? Or do you think it's just energy, or do you feel it's a spirit, or what type of entity do you think that would be?
I use the word God because that's the word with which I was raised, and it's the word with which I am comfortable. I know that a lot of people don't use that word, and that's perfectly fine. So far as I'm concerned, I've noticed that a lot of younger people, Kyle's age and younger, don't use the word God, but instead they'll use the word source or universe or source of creation. And personally, you can call it Wonder Woman. I don't care what you call it. But I think that we do have to acknowledge that there is an abiding, overseeing presence that is all loving and all knowing, and that it is a vibration that flows through everyone and everything.
So, William, I'm a huge fan of like crime documentaries, for example, crime podcasts. And I know you have mentioned that you have worked on some missing persons and homicide cases, and you've worked with police. So, do you have any particular cases that stick out to you, especially in light of any current, like I guess not current, but Gabby Petito and Brian Landry case that were national news stories? Do you have anything that you can talk about in terms of working with police, or any cases that mean anything to you?
I can speak in generic terms. I cannot breach confidentiality in revealing names,
Of course.
connected to specific cases. But if that's acceptable to you,
Of course, yeah.
what I can tell you is I do not get involved in any way unless or until I am contacted directly by law enforcement or immediate family members. So, for example, you asked about current cases that were in the media just recently, and that's not something I do. That's not something I pay attention to. You have to remember, I said I am not turned on 24/7. So when I prepare to do the work, I turn on, and when I am done, I deliberately turn off. But there was one well-known case from Pennsylvania, where I am, that was given a dramatization in a movie or a documentary of some sort that probably makes the rounds looping on those true crime programs, where a young woman was abducted from her apartment in the middle of the night. And it was a very strange case because the police had already been called out to her apartment twice prior to her disappearance that night. Very strange. And I met with her family a couple of times. And I also make a point of never saying whether I personally believe whether or not someone is living or deceased, because my message to families who are raw and desperate is to continue to hold on to hope until you receive news to the contrary. So I'm always all about let's try to remain optimistic that there will be a happy resolution to all of this. But once I was sitting with her parents, this girl came through. Part of my mental emotional well-being is, as a general rule, I don't curse or swear.
Mm-hmm.
She did. And that was part of how they identified her personality. There was one word in particular that she was fond of using.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little embarrassing for me. But we were talking about recovering her. And she crossed her arms and said, "No, it's not done yet." And I asked, what did that mean? And she said, "It hasn't played out." In other words, she was saying her disappearance was a learning opportunity, not only for her family, but for perpetrators and everyone that was involved. Now, you have to understand what a delicate process this is, because her family is desperate to know where she is and how to find her. And to sort of go off on that tangent about, well, this is sort of from a metaphysical perspective, they don't want to hear all of that. So she showed me that she does not harbor any resentment or revenge. She showed me that she was actually, at that time, was sort of in a transitory environment. There was sort of this beautiful meadow with wildflowers. She also said to her mother, "I wasn't supposed to be here that long anyways." And her mother gasped and said she had been telling me that since she was a little girl.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the case remains open, and it's going on a decade now.
I mean, it's an incredible story and experience. It makes me think of, how do I say this? Again, it kind of goes back to that, like, I don't believe in coincidence. I think everything has a reason. And I know it's often like an overused expression and often thrown around without much emotional connection to the phrase, like, oh, everything happens for a reason. Like, it's an easy thing to kind of say and throw around to each other. But I truly do believe that is a part of this universe and this, spiritual growth for every one of us. It's very interesting to continually to hear stories such as yours, and hear it straight from you, hearing it from someone directly involved like that, and with her expression of, like, it hasn't played out yet, like, in terms of who needs to learn what lesson from this, like, that perspective. It's endlessly fascinating to me to hear things like this.
Look, it's going to be hard to tell a person when their child's gone. It's like, well, everything happens for a reason,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, it's what you kind of alluded to. But William, you've been involved in missing person cases. Have they usually been when the person's deceased, or were any found and, like, they saved them from a basement or anything? I know you can't say specifics, but were there any cases, missing persons, where you were able to recover people before they passed?
I'm sorry to say not.
Okay.
I'm sorry to say not. One was very unusual. It was out of Colorado, and it was this young fellow who was very fit, a hiker, and he and his dog went missing. I was contacted by a family member, and curiously enough, he had attempted to hike the same trail the week before, and the dog refused to go down the trail. He vanished, and 7 days later, the dog was found, and he vanished near a place with the word devil in the name, which, if you know anything about Missing 411 and David Paulides, you'll recognize that as symptomatic of that type of disappearance.
Yep.
And it wasn't until last spring that his body was recovered. Also, immediately after he went missing, a fierce storm blew up that precluded any search parties from looking for him, and the storm lasted for some time.
I have a quick question, because you mentioned you're doing an event with animals. Funny, the most popular show we've done is on connecting with your pet on the other side. It's a pet psychic named Rob Guttrow. It's been on a couple times. He did a couple readings which are, like, amazing for people that I know. And I know this wouldn't be a situation you've had, but would it be feasible, the dog, if you were able to connect to the dog, would you be able to pull anything from the dog about what his fear was, or what he witnessed as a witness? Would that be something you would be able to do?
Well, I have really high standards of excellence. And so there would be no way for anyone to validate what it would be that the dog would be, quote unquote, telling me. And that's the only way I would do it.
Okay, yeah.
Is if there was a way to have, verification evidentially in what the animal was communicating. It also was that the dog was very traumatized. I know that.
Does that ever get frustrating for you, William, with, we kind of touched upon it earlier. As much as I hate talking in generalities, I'll use the general term of the paranormal as, like, an umbrella term for much of this. In general, the paranormal over the years, you had mentioned, like, back in the 70s, especially, a lot of this stuff was just sidetracked and pushed aside as part of, like, occult stuff. But, over time, obviously, as we progress as people, as we use science to progress scientific methods and such, paranormal stuff is still such a fringe science, if you will. Even if you were to talk with a dog, that's between you and the dog at that point. There's nothing that you can express for other people to take as, evidence for anything. Does that ever frustrate you with what you do, that there's so much, like, disregard for something that you, intuitively, that you practice, and it's who you, very much part of who you are and how you live?
It's only frustrating when I encounter cynics. And I'd like to make the distinction between a skeptic and a cynic, because a skeptic is at least open-minded enough to be willing to have their mind changed if they bear witness to something that causes them to become a knower and a believer and an experiencer. A cynic already has their mind made up that it's all a lot of bunk and I'm a scam artist. And so I never make any promises or guarantees of anything because, as you're alluding, it's an inexact science and it's going to be what it's going to be. And I can't make it be something that it's not. And so there may be times that people are disappointed, but I believe that they're being given what they need to hear, and that's not necessarily the same as what they want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. I was running before the podcast tonight. During my run, I was thinking, and just that was, if you watch a movie at a certain point in your life or read a book, basically, we live our life through the experiences we have are through our five senses. It's filtered through our five senses. So when we're, 14, we could read a book or have any particular experience in life. And then, if we read the same book when we're 35, we might take a completely different message or learn something different, but there's a new perspective that just will exist. Even though we've had this experience, it will become new almost because of everything that we are up to that point has changed so much. So it's kind of like what you're saying. It might not be what people want to hear at this moment, it may be what they need to hear. And that could also change. Like if you give someone a message, at a certain point in their life, maybe it is just that. Maybe it is what they need to hear, but they don't want to. But maybe at a different point, years from now, it makes sense to them at that point.
Well, in my sessions with people, Kyle, one-on-one, I always really like to send people away with homework, things that they can be working on in order to manifest their destiny and to maximize the employ of their personal gifts and talents to be of service to others. And I always let people know this is what I am projecting as a vision for your potential, for your future, but I can't do it for you. And it's not going to magically drop into your lap either. So if it intrigues you, if it piques your interest, I think that there is extraordinary potential for you to manifest this. And the people who take that to heart and the people who leave feeling motivated and inspired always follow up with me. I may not remember them, I may not remember their session, but they tell me that they underwent a transformative process and that they are living their best life doing what they love and enjoy. And that's the most rewarding aspect of my job, I think.
That's really cool to hear.
So, William, I know you also have written many books on.
I'm sorry, Bob. May I interrupt you for just a moment?
Sure.
This is not to alarm or to upset you, but Kyle, I just want to caution you to be aware of not being so hard on your left leg, left knee.
Interesting. Are you sure it's my left?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you, Bob.
No worries. No, that's great. I love it. Cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You've written several books on autism, and I know you kind of, it's parents could come out of the woodwork asking questions. My situation, I have a daughter that's autistic, and my ex-wife is always trying to cure her, with treatments and things. And I kind of there's this wholesomeness about my daughter who's autistic. She's so happy with who she is. She seems to vibrate on a higher level. What has been your experience with, working with autistic children? Or is it not really a condition, but maybe just the way they perceive the world? Do they vibrate on a different level that's higher than maybe the rest of us?
I believe that, and I've written 10 or 11 books on this subject. In my opinion, it's a neurological difference in how the brain is wired, which then leads one to perceive the world very differently, and as you're suggesting, through a higher vibration of the senses in particular. So I would like to take maybe a more of a holistic approach to how we support individuals with autism. And we're not just talking about children. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that children grow up. We're talking about teenagers. We're talking about adults on the autism spectrum. And a lot of times, people who are delayed as children in speaking or moving, it's really just a matter of acclimating that higher vibration of the soul's energy with the leaden heaviness of the human form. And so once there's that process time, which oftentimes takes a lot longer than an average or a neurotypical child, then they find their voice, or then they're able to move more freely as we would wish them to. And they are some of the most wise and sensitive and gifted people I have ever known in my entire life. That's part of the interesting secret, is that here we're trying to fix and cure something, and they are among our most spiritual citizens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And look, my ex-wife is a beautiful mom, and she does things like the neurons, making sure, and pure food and gluten-free. That's a lot of the stuff too, but she used to have just tons of B vitamins and things on the counter. You had mentioned the knee. It's funny, my autistic daughter has like a problem with her left knee where it keeps kind of popping out and she'll like fall down sometime. We're going to get her to a therapist soon. So I don't think you crossed your wires with Kyle, but I just think it's funny. It's kind of affected her too, her left knee recently.
Yeah, no, it wasn't for your daughter. I'm sorry. It was for Kyle.
All right, cool. Fair enough.
Me and Bob had previously sent emails because there's this show on Netflix. I'm not sure if either of you have seen it. It's called Atypical.
Yep.
The main character has autism. He's considered high functioning autistic. And, we watched, there's 4 or 5 seasons, and Bob, both of you actually will know better. But I'm assuming that some of the creative staff, in terms of the writers, had some sort of experience, whether it's just research or maybe they know people or have people in their lives that they were able to write this character with. And some of the behaviors that were exhibited on the show by this character, Sam, he would do certain things, and my girlfriend would be like, "Hey, you do that. So and we'd constantly like start keeping this list. And it was, and it also was from just other behaviors in my life, which I always thought were a little bit different. But then we started taking like these online tests, which, I don't really know the veracity of them at all. We tried like 3 different websites where I just had to answer questions, for example. And it was always like borderline, like high functioning autism. I don't know like if there's a question in there per se, but I did read your website, William, and you have a few bullet point questions which I connected with. And I don't know. I don't even know if there's really a question there. It was more of just like, I'm curious about what I guess autism is, or what my preconceived notions, or what I thought it was, or that kind of thing. So I don't know.
I think I know the question, Kyle, because I have to say I'm different. So I have probably different things where I feel I almost have some Asperger's things where I miss social cues, or I did throughout most of my life.
Sure.
I didn't have a ton of friends, so people think I'm very friendly and likable, and I awkward and all that stuff. So I guess the question would be, William, I think later in your life you were diagnosed or identified with certain traits of Asperger's, which is kind of on the autism spectrum. And how did you go about doing that, and how did you emotionally cope with that? Was it a sense of relief, or how did you feel when you went through that exercise?
Well, Bob, it doesn't surprise me to hear you say that you feel as though you're possessing of autistic traits, because there is a genetic component to that. And so, to be gentle, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So that doesn't surprise me. Do you understand?
Yep.
Okay. And I see that a lot. I've been working in this field since 1987. That's a long time. And so I see oftentimes that parents of individuals with autism, and sometimes it's more than one child with autism, there is a milder version of it in the father usually, because you have to remember that it's 4 to 5 times more likely to be present in males than in females. But I think bottom line is, let's not get so caught up in trying to distinguish ourselves from one another with labels, when in fact we're truly all more alike than we are different. We all have more in common than we don't.
Yeah, thank you for saying that so much. That's one thing that I talk to friends about, is how I do recognize a lot, like I feel like a lot of problems that exist among people specifically are when we do focus on differences. That's where discrimination can fit in, and bigotry and such. And those things really seem to find the crack, so to speak, in human relationships when we focus on, or put too much emphasis on the differences and why differences are bad versus what you just said is like, if we can concentrate on more, let the differences be accepting and learning from each other. So yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yep. A psychiatrist with whom I was engaged in conversation with some years ago said to me about the diagnosis, if it works for you, if it makes sense for you, use it. Employ it, make it work. And if at any point in time it stops working for you, then I'm empowered to discard it. It doesn't define me. It's merely a point of reference.
And that's a great reference point for us I think, to kind of end on this, which is great because you've accomplished so much, William, and you have such a calmness and quiet confidence about yourself, which really comes through. And you've seemed to evolve so far from, like you mentioned, kind of the awkward younger gentleman that was kind of not really known to who you are today. So it's a great evolution and a testament to you.
Well, I'd like to think I'm not done.
That's awesome.
I'd like to think that I'm still evolving and that there's more to come. So stay tuned, fellas.
Yeah, I think all three of us. So thank you for all your time. I do want to talk about what you're doing because I know our audience is going to be on the edge of their seat to find out more. You've been on some great podcasts. I found you just by going on Spotify and Googling William Stillman, and I heard you on a bunch of different podcasts. You have a couple places where people can go. You are an hour from Gettysburg, and even though you're not a historian or don't know much about the Civil War per se, you do go out there periodically with historians, and they will bring you on a walk, and you pick up a bunch of things. So you want to talk about where they can watch those videos?
People can watch my videos on my YouTube channel, which is simply my name, William Stillman. If people want to learn more about me and who I am and what I'm about and all that I've accomplished, they can go to williamstillman.com. And also there is a schedule on my website of events and activities that I have coming up. And I would also like to encourage your listeners to consider following me on Facebook if they are Facebook people. And my Facebook page is William Stillman Psychic Medium. And every morning I put up an original inspirational quote that I get in my prayers and meditation time, usually on my walks. And I match an image to go with it. And people seem to appreciate having a thought with which to begin their day. And I am coming up on number 2,700.
Wow.
And they're all different. And at one point on my walk, I said, how many more could there possibly be? And somebody said, we got 1 million of them. So I just keep writing them down and putting them up.
That's great. What about your book? Your books is it on Audible? Is it on Amazon? What's the best place to get your books?
Again, on my website, there is a books page, and you can see there's a rather diverse range of books there, from the clinical to metaphysical to the fantastical, and everything is there for you with links to click through to purchase the books depending upon what piques your interest, if anything. So I would be greatly appreciative of your listeners just checking it out and seeing what they think.
Awesome. Yeah, and leaving reviews once they do check out your books, which would be great. We know that's important. And the last thing this will be posted before December. We're in the middle of November now. So do you have any gallery readings coming up or any online events in particular you would like to direct them to?
The gallery events that I have are going to be live and in person. There may be one that is a Zoom event, but again, folks will have to check my online schedule. And also keep checking the YouTube channel because I was just in Gettysburg recently and there are 4 new videos going up very soon.
What if people want to reach out and get a reading from you? I know you typically limit 1 reading per year for people just because it's just the volume and just because for other reasons as well. Are you booked out for 6 months to a year, or can people contact you via your website for a potential reading?
People can contact me through my website for an online session. I've read for people all over the world. You're absolutely right, Bob. I allow 1 session per year only, and I'm really firm about that. And people have been begging and crying and pleading, and I've caught people trying to book sooner than that. There's a method to my madness, and it is absolutely important to maintain ethical standards. So I will not allow people to book more than once a year. But yes, reach out. We can do that. We can arrange that. And
that sounds great.
I've had clients that keep coming back to me year after year. I don't think that's especially a good thing. It's not something I'm interested in doing for myself. I've never been interested in it, but people must find some value in it, and so I'm glad.
Well, we found a lot of value in this tonight.
Yeah, and I do want to quickly say, I don't remember the exact statement. Bob, you made an analogy of a movie, and William, your reply involved that you didn't think there was I'm paraphrasing, a great climatic ending to that movie. But it just made me think, I hope you both know how much value you add in this world. Listening to you, and William, I realize I'm literally just meeting you tonight, but I've read about you and seen some of your videos. And I think both of you add so much value and help so many people connect with themselves, and especially for those that might just have a hard time finding where they can fit in or feel different or feel as outcasts. In the podcast, I think it reaches out to a lot of people. And William, what you do with everyone is just so helpful. So I just wanted to mention that both of you are doing such a great service to, humanity, if you will.
Oh my goodness. That's awfully sweet of you to say, Kyle. Thank you. I also want to tell you that you have not yet completely fulfilled your mission and purpose.
I feel that.
Which is to teach. You're intended to be a teacher.
Wow. That's not a shock to me.
So please think on that, would you?
Yeah, either a podcast or a book, Kyle.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. He's kind of a seeker. He's an actor, and he's done well in that phase of his career. I've known Kyle for a while, and it's kind of like he's looking to the next thing that kind of really defines whom he is. And I think he's getting closer, hopefully, the more we do these. And Kyle, thank you to be in the same breath as William Stillman helping humanity. My God.
I appreciate it.
I'll sleep well tonight. So William, Kyle, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday season, and look forward to connecting again.
All right, fellas. It was great fun. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.